Welcome, everyone. This is the Shooting It Straight podcast with Justin Jackson. I am producer John. We are super excited to be with you tonight to talk about UNC basketball. The title of this show is ACC Up Next because we are turning the page on non conference play. It went by so quickly, it feels like, but just like that, the Tar Heels are entering the ACC only portion of their schedule. Remember, they already played one ACC game earlier in the year. Louisville is up next. We're going to talk about ACC play, some of the teams that have caught our eye around the league, look a little bit at bracketology even tonight. It's going to be a show that covers a lot of topics. So we appreciate you all joining us tonight here on the Inside Carolina YouTube channel and every single Monday night. We had a really big audience for last week's show. Everyone loved talking to Justin and Theo. So excited to be back here tonight to talk about the Tar Heels. Before we get into ACC play, though, we're going to start off by hitting on last night's game against Campbell. The Tar Heels closed out non-conference, like I said earlier, with a 97-81 win over Campbell in their first ever matchup against the in-state opponent. Justin, I know there's not a ton that can be taken away from a game like that, but what were some of your biggest takeaways from that final tune-up game?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tune-up game is the perfect word to use to describe that kind of game. Campbell obviously played really well, especially in the second half, but North Carolina was just more gifted and talented than this team. I think it was interesting to see with Seth being out, just different guys in the rotation, different guys in the starting lineup, and how they did the minutes as far as that. That was kind of intriguing to me. Um, but yeah, I mean, North Carolina for the most part did what they were supposed to against a team like Campbell. I think if you really wanted to be nitpicky, I think I was watching the Coach Davis's press conference, and I think he said they held him to 31% in the first half and 61 in the second half. So, maybe letting the foot off the gas a little bit in the second half. But at the same time, that's kind of whenever they extended the run at times, it felt like. So, one of those games where, you love to see guys like Ian, continue to, shoot the ball well and play well on the offensive end, and RJ knocking down shots consistently again. And then you see guys like Jay Wash and other guys that are able to step in, Drake, that are able to kind of continue their good play from that UCLA game. So, I think it was a good game leading into ACC. So I think that's going to be exciting going into conference play.
We have to give a shout out as well to Colby Duggan, who absolutely lit it up last night for Campbell. It was the most points ever scored by a Camel against an ACC opponent, so that shows you it was a historic mark for him. Another little bit of history, Ian Jackson, the 10th Tar Heel freshman to score 24 or more points in consecutive games. The last Tar Heel freshman to do it was Cole Anthony in the 2019-2020 season. I'm going to read off a few other names on this list because it's really great company. Speaks to some Tar Heel basketball history as well. Some other Tar Heels to score 24 or more points in consecutive games as a freshman: Kobe White, Harrison Barnes, Tyler Hansborough, Rashad McCants, Antoine Jamison, J.R. Reed, Phil Four, and Al Lifson. So that's a really good fraternity there. Great company for Ian Jackson. He also started in this game. I think that's a big turning point from him. Justin, specifically with Ian Jackson and seeing him kind of slide into that starting role, he performed well scoring. Did you have any other takeaways from his performance now that he got that first chance to start?
No, I mean, I think, I think he showed. Once again, I think we have to look at this game from the perspective of North Carolina is just more talented than Campbell was, and you're not going to run into many teams in the ACC, where the talent level is the discrepancy is that much. But at the same time, Ian showed that being in the starting lineup or coming off the bench, he's very capable of doing the same exact thing that he's been doing. Um, so I think for me, whenever I see a guy like Ian, it's you need a guy that's just completely fearless, right? Almost a guy that doesn't care about the outcome, and is going to do and be aggressive at all times. And so seeing Ian and the way that he, the last few games, not just the last game, but just the way that he's been attacking the basket, the way he's been shooting it. I think he's shooting like 42% from three, which is something that I thought was going to take some time to kind of adjust to, but obviously I was wrong. And so kind of seeing that and just his ability to kind of just get on fire at any point throughout a game, I think it completely changes the dynamic of the team. It makes everything way easier for a guy like RJ, makes it easier for a guy like Elliott. Driving lanes are way wider whenever you have a guy that's able to score and shoot the ball like Ian is. And so, and when Seth comes back, I think you're gonna see it in his game as well. It just creates so much more space and freedom for everybody else outside of him. So, hopefully he can continue this. Obviously, do we expect a freshman to average 24 points through ACC play? Not necessarily, but I think he's obviously shown he's very capable of doing that on a consistent basis. So super excited to kind of see his maturity as the ACC play starts, and as teams, are able to scout a little bit more, and you play teams, at least once, usually twice throughout the conference play. So hopefully he can continue this hot streak that he has going and the consistency that he's been showing.
If you're in the chat and watching us live here, let us know where you're watching from. We've got a few people who've shared where they're watching from tonight. Michael Daniels in Goldsboro, NC, Tony Dowd in Paducah, Kentucky. So appreciate all of you watching live. You talked about turning the page there from non-conference play to ACC play and how that changes things for the Tar Heels. Let's take one last look back at the full sort of non-conference slate. UNC finishes 7-5 in non-conference. They currently have an 8-5 record, not counting that win against Georgia Tech in that non-conference look of things. Their losses were on the road against Kansas, the 2 losses in Maui, the home loss to Alabama, and then that game against Florida in Charlotte. That's the 5 losses there for North Carolina. So, when you look at that non-conference slate, that's a really, really tough schedule. I think I saw a stat earlier today on Twitter that North Carolina had the toughest schedule against anyone in the net top 100. And that is thus far. So it's a snapshot of the season, but still, I think that speaks to what, Justin, we've been talking about for a long time here, that the schedule just was really unkind to the Tar Heels, but that also can turn because they've gained a lot of experience. They're not going to face many tougher environments than they faced playing in Lawrence, Kansas in the second game of the season. So looking at that whole non-conference schedule and some of the wins and losses that the Tar Heels had, Justin, what do you think is the biggest thing that you learned about this basketball team?
Yeah, I mean, I think, saying that the schedule was unfair. I mean, that's what guys come to North Carolina to do, is play seasons and play games like they did in their non-conference season. I've talked about it before, but going into Kansas to play against the number one team in the country, that's what every guy that's gone to North Carolina wants to do, right? Playing against an Auburn and a Michigan State and Maui, like that's what you want to do. That's why you go to a school like North Carolina. And so I wouldn't necessarily say it's been unkind to them. I think it was unfortunate that they weren't able to pull out more of those games. Obviously, that UCLA game was a huge one, especially, I think UCLA just beat against a really good Gonzaga team. So, games like that go a long ways. But when you look at that schedule, I think it's huge tests. I think it's games that you can take going into ACC play now, and say, hey, look, we've played every style of basketball. We've played every level of basketball at this point. We played against probably, at least 2 of the top 5 teams in the country right now. And so I think having that mindset, I think, is the right way to go, as opposed to, man, the schedule was really tough on us. But I think going into ACC play, it's a, you look at the non-conference play and you kind of see, we've talked about kind of some of the things we've seen through, leading up to this point, right? You've seen, two different halves in most big time games. You've seen a team that can really score at times, but defensively they've shown that there's not a ton of resistance at times. But then you've also seen teams where they all of a sudden throw a press on, or they pick up the pressure and the physicality, and it looks like a totally different team. They're able to get out in transition. You don't really talk about them being out rebounded or the size that they have. So I think for me, when I look at it, right, overall, just kind of looking at some of the stats, they're 16th in the country in scoring points per game, right? So that's pretty impressive. A lot of times you want to be within top 20 to top 50 teams in the country. Um, but then you look at their defensive stats and they're like 337th in the country in points being scored against them, right? You're 171st in opponents' field goal percentage. You're 295th in opponents' three-point field goal percentage. So I think defensively, that's where we've kind of seen it waver at times. But then you've seen them, like I said, in second halves of games or even in that UCLA game of, okay, this is a team that could really cause some issues, right? So I think for me, it's a matter of just kind of seeing that consistency. And I hate to be kind of a broken record, but seeing that consistency, it's not going to be, Theo made a good point last week. It's not going to be for a full 40 minutes in a game. That's just not how basketball works. You're going to have some lulls. It's a game of runs. The other team's going to make runs and they're going to hit some tough shots at times. But it's a matter of having just throughout the game a consistent effort and a consistent, physicality and a consistent pressure and attack mode at all times. And I think we saw that in the UCLA game. I think, against Campbell, for the most part, you saw it the majority of the game. And that was with one of their best players and Seth being out as well. So I think for me, it's okay taking, these last two games leading up to the ACC play. And hey, let's now try to translate this against, better teams or teams that might know us a little bit better and never waver from who we're going to be and how hard we're going to play and how we're going to play on a consistent night to night basis.
Another thing you brought up within there is the defense, and I think that's a big part of what we learned about this team in non-conference play. It brings up this question from Melinda, a regular. So thank you, Melinda, for joining tonight. Defense needs to be a priority. What specifically are UNC lacking on defense to be more effective? I think for me, when I look at that question, I look at a few different things. Number one, it is just a fact that North Carolina is challenged, vertically at a lot of different positions. That's a nice way of saying they're undersized. Ken Palm has an average height metric when you're looking at a team's personnel, and UNC is 317th in the country in that average height metric, which shows they're not just small at the front court, but also in the back court with some of their guards. And then I do think a lot of what we've talked about as well around UNC's mindset and their physicality on defense. That is something that really stands out to me when I'm watching this team play. Communication is another really big thing on switches. UNC is doing a lot of off-ball switching, especially when they're playing with some of the smaller lineups. They want to make sure that no big gets stuck or gets caught with a smaller guard on them. So they're doing a lot of switching. Communication has to be a priority there defensively. Justin, I'll bring the question back up for you. What are some things that stand out to you defensively for the Tar Heels?
Yeah, I think I'm interested to kind of see some of those adjustments as well as ACC play starts. I think that the reality of this team is it's not going to change the size, right? Like there's not all of a sudden going to have a 7-footer or two 6'11" guys down there that are shot blockers. You're just not going to randomly just you know have that appear. So this team is who this team is. I think I'm interested to see maybe some of the adjustments. I was just talking to Kenny, shout out to another UNC legend, Kenny Williams. But I was just talking to him today about kind of what he thinks defensively are some things that, could, be some changes that could be made or things like that. I think my junior year, which would have been his sophomore year, we kind of made an adjustment. North Carolina's always known, as far as getting out of passing lanes and denying and getting steals and getting into transition. Um, but I think without having true size inside means that you don't necessarily have rim protection, right? And we've seen a bunch of that kind of throughout the non-conference play as far as, guards or wings or whoever being able to get downhill and there's not a ton of resistance at the rim. Um, and so I think kind of talking to him, which really made a lot of sense, and I think I agree, is interested to see if maybe we go to, we called it a 21 whenever I was there, but basically it's guys are kind of in the gaps, right? Like there's a ton of pressure on ball, to where the guards are taking advantage of a lot of times their speed and their, physicality and athleticism against some of the other guards. But then if they were to get, you know, blown by or a guy were to get past them, there's help before it gets to the rim. I think even against Campbell, you saw a lot of backdoor cuts, a lot of situations where guys were able to drive and there's not really anybody in the gap. So then it gets down to the last level of defense at the rim, and there's just not a ton. I think Jay Wash had a few blocks there, against Campbell, but maybe against a more athletic team or a little more skilled team, it's going to be tough to just try to battle at the rim as opposed to, okay, hey, let's try to keep this on the perimeter by helping, from the other guards that are maybe plugging, in the holes or in the gaps or whatever it might be. So I think that's kind of what I'm interested to see, if maybe they go to that. Maybe they throw a little zone in there at times. I think that's kind of the tough part about this defense is if it gets past the first line of defense, it's going to be hard to, keep them off the rim or keep them, from being able to just attack the rim. Now, there are other ways as far as, taking charges or coming over early in rotations. There's certain things you can do, but on a consistent basis, it's going to be tough not having a rim protector if you're always pressuring, denying, and not really helping from the perimeter.
Yeah, we've talked about that in some of the clips. The last line of defense sometimes is Elliott or Ian, and that's a really tough spot for them to be in. We're going to take a quick break here, and we're going to talk a little bit about our sponsors. Shout out to Johnny T-Shirt. They are the best place for Tar Heel gear. They're a Chapel Hill tradition since 1983 and 20-year partners with Inside Carolina. You can visit them on Franklin Street or check out their online store for all of your Tar Heel basketball or football gear needs. Honestly, they have gear for all sports. They do a really good job of that in the store. They have for all the Olympic sports, even for Tar Heel pickleball. Apparently, they were sold out of that shirt around the holidays. So shout out to Johnny T-Shirt for supporting this show. Also want to give a shout out to Congruity. They are the leading provider for Tar Heel business owners, payroll, HR, and employee benefits needs. Inside Carolina listeners can get a free payroll and HR assessment by emailing Matt at Congruity. So thanks to Johnny T-Shirt and to Congruity for supporting this podcast and all of Inside Carolina shows. We're going to take a quick break, let the national ads play for a second. We'll be back here shortly to talk more UNC basketball. We're here on the second to last day of 2024. Where did this year go? It went so quickly, but we're here to talk about some UNC basketball. Shout out to the 59 Tar Heel fans who are here with us watching live on YouTube. Remember, we're going to be live every single Monday night during basketball season, including later on in February. We'll be live after some of the Tar Heel games on Monday night, so keep an eye out for that. The Coast to Coast crew was live last night after the Campbell game, so it's fun to be able to do some live shows after these basketball games. Justin, our next kind of topic here on the show is something that's always a little bit tough to talk about because you and I are not bracketologists and it's not March yet. So it's too early to be talking about this too much. But it's impossible to not think about it a little bit for the Tar Heels, starting to kind of look ahead to what seed this team could be in the NCAA tournament. I think everyone had high expectations for the Tar Heels coming into the season. And that was, reflected in where they were maybe expected to be seed-wise. Joe Lunardi from ESPN in the 12-24 bracketology that he released had UNC as a 10 seed. That did incorporate the win against UCLA. So UNC's sort of premier non-conference win, along with the win against Dayton, was included within that. And then JBR Bracketology on Twitter, he posted a little update. He said target record for a NCAA tournament bid for the Tar Heels is 18-14, and he said 13-7. That would potentially get them a 7 or 8 seed, 13-7 in ACC play. So this is kind of tied in with our preview a little bit of the ACC schedule that is coming up. Justin, I'm curious at all as a player. Is that something that you were aware of even remotely, especially at this point in the year? And then once it got into March, did it really matter really at all where you were seated within the bracket, or was it really just a matter of making the NCAA tournament kind of a yes or no question?
Yeah, I think it was. It's hard to compare really any team that I was on to this team. I think not necessarily that we were just so much better than this team, um, but there was just a little more consistency with our teams.
Mm-hmm.
And so going through ACC play, other than maybe my freshman year where it was kind of up in the air as far as what our seating might be, there wasn't necessarily will we make the tournament? But it was, we don't really know where we might be seated. Um, I think it's having a higher seed obviously is especially for the first weekend, which is the most important because if you don't make it out of that, then you're done. Being able to play in Raleigh and um, I guess maybe was it Greensboro maybe um, being able to play close to home and basically have home games for that first weekend is huge. I think you're seeing a ton of that in all sports, right? The advantage of being able to play at home just creates that much more challenge for the other team, and you're able to play with so much more confidence and energy, if you are in that scenario. So for this team, I think, like you said, I'm not a bracketologist. Half the time that these people are talking about quad one, quad two, all that sort of stuff, I don't even understand it. um but when you look at this team, right, you finish off a tough non-conference schedule where, yeah, you wish you were able to get a few more, but you finish it off beating a really good UCLA team who also looks like they're getting better and better, which will only help North Carolina's resume. And then you kind of I looked at their schedule, and I think they've got 7 more opportunities as of right now for quad one games. They've got 4 more quad two opportunities, and like 6 more quad three opportunities. So I don't know necessarily what the quad two and quad three does in the bracketology, but having 7 more chances at quad one teams is huge, right? So I think when you see them going into ACC play, having a really strong ACC, even though the ACC is, I'll be the first to admit, it's a little down compared to maybe the SEC or, some other conferences, still having those kind of opportunities throughout this, next, whatever, 18, 19 games, whatever it might be, is huge. And I think the most important game is the next game, right? Coach Williams would always say it, like the most important game is this game, right? So the next important game for this UNC team is Louisville, and then so on and so forth. So, taking each game by game, not necessarily worrying about, the bracketology or the seeding or whatever. I think the most important thing is for them to focus in on each and every opportunity that they have um, to get a big time win or to just get a big win in the ACC. Because as much as people might not, want to admit it, having ACC teams in the tournament are huge. So just taking game by game, and once again that consistency, and I think this team could make a really really good run in the ACC and set themselves up still pretty good for the tournament time.
Yeah, you referenced it, so I'll briefly hit on this. There's a Raleigh regional this year in the NCAA tournament. So currently Duke is the number 1 seed for the West region in Joe Lunardi's bracketology, so they would be playing in Raleigh for that. I totally agree with you. Anytime you get the opportunity to play those tournament games in Charlotte, Greensboro or Raleigh, that would make a huge difference. But you start to look at UNC's record and, the 7 quad 1 opportunities for them to bump up to that 1 or that 2 line and be able to play there in Raleigh. That'd be really tough. The Twitter account JBR Bracketology that I referenced earlier said a 14-6 ACC record that would potentially project to a 6 or 7 seed for UNC. So they'd really have to go nuclear in conference play to bump all the way up to one of those top seeds. So yeah, I think the approach that you outlined there, just taking it one game at a time, focusing on what you can control, is the right one for the Tar Heels. This is also a little bit of a new look ACC. It's been on the minds of everyone from football's perspective with SMU making the conference championship game. But they're also playing in the Atlantic Coast Conference in basketball, which is a little, it's different certainly to see that. Duke, Clemson, SMU, Pitt, those are some of the top teams right now in the ACC. Duke, Clemson, and SMU, those first 3 teams that I mentioned, they already have a 2-0 conference record. SMU is 11-2 on the season. The middle class of the ACC, that's where I think there's maybe some more gaps, as well as maybe that top end team. You're used to having a few top end teams within the ACC, but right now it's just kind of Duke standing alone at the top of the conference. So Justin, UNC is going to be playing 18 or so conference games. Don't have the exact number in front of me. They're going to get a chance to travel around the country to play all these teams. What are some of the teams that have really stood out to you from an X's and O's perspective, from a personnel perspective? And also, can you just speak a little bit to what's it like kind of competing night in and night out in the ACC and the toll that takes on a team?
Yeah, I mean, you already mentioned SMU. They don't really have any big wins this year so far, but being 11-2 going into ACC play, they've got like 6 guys that average double figures. I think they might average more per game scoring wise than even North Carolina does. So obviously going to be a tough team and a new team. You having these new teams and them and what Stanford and Cal. You've never really seen them. You don't really have film on them against ACC opponents. So I think that just kind of adds a different perspective to it. So I'm interested to kind of see how they do once conference play really starts. You mentioned Clemson. They had a huge win earlier in the season against a really good Kentucky team. They've got, I think, the 4th ranked rebounder in the country, and Ian Shefflin, and then some other good players and Chase Hunter and things like that. So you've got them who has a bunch of veterans, some size. And then I know as much as fans hate to talk about them, but that team down the road is pretty good this year. I'm not going to necessarily blow them up too much, but, they've got some really good talent. They've got a generational talent in Cooper Flag. You've got some other freshmen in Khan and I think Common, who's 7'2" with a 9'8" standing reach, which for me, that's just incredible. I mean, you're telling me you only need to jump 4 inches to be able to dunk the ball 4 or 5 inches. And they've got some huge wins. They've beaten Auburn. They've beaten an Arizona team who's now struggling, but at the time was supposed to be pretty good. And they're number 4 in the country. So you get 2 games against those guys. Coming out with at least one of them would be huge. You've got Clemson, like I said, who's really good. And then every ACC game is going to be hard, right? Like being in the ACC, whether it's a down year or not, especially being at North Carolina, even if North Carolina is kind of having a down year, North Carolina always gets the best shot of anybody. Doesn't matter if it's Boston College, a new team in Cal, it doesn't matter who it is, they're going to get the best shot. And so every single game, that's why I say every single game is important to take it as the most important game. And starting with this Louisville game, I know we'll talk about it in a second, but Louisville lost one of their best players to a season-ending injury. But going into a Yum Center, who from my experience, I think I was maybe 0-2 in the Yum Center. you know, every single ACC game is going to be a grind, and it's going to take, a full 40 minutes of, closing a team out. And so for this team, it's taking each and every game, watching the scout, watching the film, looking at the matchups, the preferences, the tendencies, and then whatever game plan they have for their own team, for their own guys and plays and things like that that they're going to be running, and locking in and executing all of that to a high level, because it's tough. Every single game is tough. Away, home, doesn't matter. So, having that mindset is going to be key for this team.
I'll hit on a few of the ACC schedule highlights before we get to a listener question here. January 1st, like we talked about, is the next game on the schedule, against Louisville. SMU comes to Chapel Hill on Tuesday, January 7th. The first Duke game is on the road on February 1st, and then the Blue Devils come to Chapel Hill on March 8th to close out the season. I'm going to bring up this question from DM Fan. We didn't get a chance to talk about RJ's super strong performance against Campbell. He looked really good shooting the basketball. Certainly, that's something you hope to see continue heading into ACC play. We talk about RJ so much as sort of a finished product, as someone who's been so consistent and has so many accolades for the Tar Heels. It's easy to forget that there's still different things that he could do to improve his game. So that's what DM Fan is asking. How can RJ Davis improve his game? Justin, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I think we first have to give a shout out to him. I think he broke Marcus Page's career 3-point record.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to give him a shout out for doing that. I mean, I was just talking to Kenny once again today, and I was just telling him, you can never take anything away from what RJ Davis has done in a North Carolina jersey, right? Like last year was historic, but obviously through his whole entire career, he's now in the history books for certain stats. He's accomplished so much. He's made it to a national championship game. There's so many things that he has done while being in a North Carolina jersey that we cannot get, used to it and almost just think that it's, not as impressive, right? So, when you see RJ, what can he do to improve his game? I think just continue to lead. I love the fact that he's overshadowed in a game where he's scores 23 points and he's 7 for 13 and 5 for 10 from three, because that means that there's somebody else or multiple other players that are having an unbelievable game. Um, but for him, it's just a matter of just being RJ Davis, right? I'm going to continue to say it. There's nothing else that he needs to do other than being, um, the All American, the ACC Player of the Year, preseason ACC, All ACC, All American. Like, there's nothing else that he needs to do, for his own game. Um, maybe it's just defensively being a little more, whatever it might be, pressure a little bit more, physical a little bit more. Um, but offensively, I mean, you're seeing it. Like he's starting to kind of get his groove back, scoring the ball wise. But even before that, he was, you know, making plays for others off of the pick and roll or off of, downhill drives and, helping his teammates offensively when he didn't really have it going. So for me, watching RJ, it's just a matter of seeing him get back comfortable and get back, confident and fully back to who he is. And I think these last two games have been huge to kind of see him, gradually kind of getting back into that rhythm and, being who he is.
Absolutely. I want to hit on the full stat. RJ Davis set the UNC record for career 3-point field goals with 303. He came into the game against Campbell with 298, one behind Marcus Page. So he became the first Tar Heel with at least 300 career 3-pointers. Now, Justin, I really do not want to start any controversy with this, but I'm really just curious if you have a perspective here. There's been a lot of chat and discussion about this on the message boards on social media that RJ hit this mark in 5 seasons compared to Marcus Page doing it in fewer seasons. As a former player, do you have a perspective on that? Is there a, is there a asterisk? Some people have said with the 5 seasons versus Marcus doing it in 4. What do you think about that when it comes to records and extra seasons?
If you want to be nitpicky, you can. I think the same situation is happening in the NFL right now with Saquon Barkley breaking Eric Dickerson's, I think, rushing record. And the whole thing is, oh, but he's got, I think it's maybe 2 extra games for Saquon or maybe just 1. Um, Breaking a stat or a whatever you want to call it at any time in a season or in a career um, is, I think maybe we should just pay more attention of how unbelievable that is, as opposed to being nitpicky and saying, oh, but he did it in 5 seasons as opposed to 4. Yes, did if Marcus had another season, would the record be higher? 100%. That's just kind of how it goes. But that's just not what happened, right? And so now RJ, it's not necessarily RJ's fault that he had the ability to come back for a 5th year. So he's just dealing with whatever he has, and that's an extra year of eligibility because of the unfortunate, COVID situation that we had in this country. So sitting here and saying, "Oh, but he had 5 years to do it." No, let's just sit here and congratulate him, and watch as he continues to build that record. Because I know for a fact a guy like Marcus is not sitting there saying, "Oh, but he beat me and he had an extra year." Like the way Marcus is, he's doing the same thing. He's building him up. He's congratulating him, and he's going to continue to do the same thing I'm going to be doing and watching him hit many more threes throughout this season. So obviously people always want to argue and nitpick and, at times find the negatives and things. I think we should just sit back and watch, the historic run that he's had, and how he's going to continue to build that for the next player that comes and might go in 5 or might go in 6 years. All right. Like there's always
Hmm.
going to be something you can argue about, but I think for me, it's just impressive that 300 threes in a career. That's unbelievable. So shout out to him and shout out to Marcus for being second now.
Yeah, and for the record, I'm with you there. I totally agree. The game of basketball has changed. For a while, there was no three-point line. Now, there's a lot more three-pointers being attempted and taken. There's better skill across the sport. That should be celebrated. And then especially with college basketball, I mean, players play for different lengths of time. It's just a fact. Some people are one and done. That
Mhm.
doesn't mean that a one and done Marvin Williams isn't a special player. He just was there for 1 season. RJ has been here for 5 seasons. And with the whole NCAA thing, who knows? Maybe there'll be 8-year players at UNC. You'll have a 30-year-old play. Who knows what will happen with that? But I was curious to get your perspective there because it has been something that people have talked about, and I agree with you there. We should just celebrate the accomplishments. We're going to do a new segment tonight. This is new for our regular viewers, new for our first time viewers, something a little different here. We're going to call it Crashing the Boards. So if you're watching this show, you probably know about the Inside Carolina Premium message boards. UNC fans love to go on there and debate different things. So what I've done is I've taken a thread from the UNC basketball premium message board that Justin really has not seen because he's not on the message boards very much. And I'm going to get his take on something that was shared. So this is something that was shared by Heel Explorer 84 earlier this week, and it's generated a lot of debate. And that user asked, did UNC just find its best 5 lineup? And the lineup that he or she threw out there was Elliot Cadeau, RJ, Ian, Drake, and Jalen Washington. Now, I looked at the numbers for this just to add a little bit more context here. Looking only at lineups with 15 or more possessions, 5-man lineups, that lineup is ranked 7th in an efficiency metric from Evan Mia and his statistics. So right off the bat, it's not the best lineup from a statistical perspective. But Justin, what do you think about that lineup, that 5 there? And did UNC find its best 5 when Seth was out with injury last night?
um, I'm just gonna go and say no. I think there's a bunch of different perspectives and reasons I say no. The first one is because they were playing against the Campbell Fighting Camels. right? And there's no disrespect to them. Obviously, they played unbelievable, especially in the second half. You mentioned Colby Dugan, who had 32, right? Like they played well, but it's still Campbell. Um, when you look at a guy like Seth being out, right, it gives somebody like an Ian to go into the starting lineup. They changed up the starting rotations and the minutes and things like that kind of in this game because you have that ability to do that in a game like this. Um, for me, saying that Seth is not a part of the best five is at this point kind of disrespectful from the standpoint of Seth for the longest. To start this season was kind of the most consistent player for this North Carolina team, right? So now because he's out and because Ian has once again a really good game, um, and they handle a Campbell team who once again was a little less talented. Now we're going to sit here and say, oh no, Seth's not a part of that best five. I think that's just kind of outlandish at this point, right? Um, Now, did they find a five that I think could work in certain games? I think 100%. Um, did they find and did they have a guy like Jalen Washington show some aggression and show some, what we talked about earlier that they kind of lack in some rim protection? Yes, I think they did. But to sit here and say that Seth is not a part of the best five, I don't necessarily know who the best five is. I think it's going to change from game in and game out. Like I said, I don't know if we can necessarily sit here and expect Ian to average 25 points a game going through ACC play, right? So there might be a game where he goes 1 for 9, 1 for 10, and Seth goes 7 for 12, right, and finishes with 20 or 25 points, right? So there's just different times. There might be a situation where Van Allen Lubin is playing way better than Jay Wash, right? Like there's going to be certain situations, certain matchups, um, and that's kind of in a weird way, that's the beauty of this team, right? It's going to change from game to game. You're going to have a guy like RJ who's going to be solid. You're going to have a guy like Elliott who's going to be pretty consistent, and you're going to have a guy like Seth who's going to be consistent in the minutes and the rotation. Outside of that, it might be Drake one game. It might be Ian for 3 games in a row, and then all of a sudden he has a tough one. So now all of a sudden somebody else has to step up. So for me personally, and this is just my opinion, I don't necessarily think we found the best five in this game. I think that five played really well, and so shout out to them and credit to them. But I think going forward, I'm not going to sit here and say, "Oh, that five needs to start and Seth needs to, figure it out." So that's kind of my opinion. I know, like you said, thankfully I'm not on the message board because I would have already put that on there, and I probably would have had a lot of people coming at me. But um, I think it's just from game to game. I think you're going to see different guys step up for that, fourth or fifth spot for this team.
Yeah, I think the big thing for me is just defense. We've talked about heading into ACC play and some of the matchups. UNC's going to be facing some really good scores. You're going to need Seth there defensively to lock them down and to throw his athleticism on them. Justin, I'm going to do one more question because I think it's a really good question. I know we're going a little bit long here tonight on the Monday night, but we appreciate all 77 people watching live and everyone who's going to tune in later on YouTube or listening to us on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to your podcasts. Really interesting question here from Rob M. And shout out to Rob. I don't think we've seen you on the show here, so thanks for watching tonight. When the offense goes stagnant, do you see that as a coaching scheme issue or one of player execution? Justin, what do you think?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think sometimes it's execution. I think there's certain times I can kind of see in a game where I can see a play that they're trying to run, and maybe a player, misses an assignment, or a certain screen wasn't set. Maybe the big slipped out, and as opposed to him screening and causing an advantage for the rest of the play. I think at times also, I think you kind of saw it in the UCLA game. Honestly, having a guy like RJ who can score, and we know he can score, having a guy like Ian who's showing that he has that ability to come off the bench, start whatever it is, and be able to put up 20 like it's his breakfast. Um, I think it's at times you kind of have to just simplify it, right? At times in the UCLA game in that second half, they were just basically hunting matchups for Ian or RJ. Whether it was the big guy or whether it was just a defender that wasn't necessarily as strong as the others, and just letting them go to work. I think sometimes in basketball, you just have to simplify it. When you have, two scores, the way that, those two guys can score. And then that just opens up everything else. Now, all of a sudden, the defense has to start helping. They have to start rotating, causes way more open looks for guys, and causes driving lanes to be way more open. So I think, if this team doesn't really have a big, um, or a real inside presence consistently, then you know what? Maybe we go from, setting, ball screens and trying to hit the pocket and getting the bigs involved. And we just set a good screen, get a mismatch that we want, and now let those guys, do what they do best. So I think it's a kind of a mixture. But you've seen the adjustments in these games. You've seen in UCLA, you kind of saw the first half that UCLA's defense was really causing some issues. And then the second half, hey, let's just find the matchup we want. And y'all go do what, nowadays, y'all go do what y'all are getting paid to do, um, and are on scholarship to do, and go get us a bucket whenever we need a bucket. But I think the execution on both ends of the floor is going to be huge, especially once you start playing against teams that have already scouted you and have already played you at least once, right? There has to be a fine balance of, hey, we got to execute offensively. But, these guys have already gone over our plays. They could probably call out our plays by the second game. So now, hey, let's start finding the matchups we want. We, obviously our strengths are these guards being able to get downhill. And even a guy like Elliott or Seth being able to, take advantage of those mismatches. So, I'm interested to kind of see how they mesh those together and mix them in as this conference play starts.
Yes, conference play starts in earnest with Louisville on Wednesday, January 1st, New Year's Day. I believe that is a 6 o'clock tip on the road. So kind of an interesting time there for a basketball game. Wednesday afternoon at 6, or Wednesday evening at 6. After that, Notre Dame is the next game. So we'll be back next week to talk about both the Louisville and the Notre Dame game. Justin, I'm going to give you the last word here, an opportunity to perhaps preview the UNC-Louisville game a little bit if there's anything you wanted to call out there. Any other final thoughts? Any advice for our New Year's resolutions? Anything you want to do to help us close out the show here before we get out of here on a Monday night?
Yeah, I can hit on all that really quick. Going into Louisville, I looked back. I think it was my freshman year. We went in. They had guys like Terry Rozier, Montrezl Harrell. I think a guy Wayne Blackshear, Chris Jones was a guard that was there, and it was a wide out in the Yum Center. And I'll never forget the play. They threw like a half court alley oop to Montrez, and there's no way he should have caught it and dunked it, and somehow he did, and that place was rocking, and we ended up losing the game. And then, the next the next season was kind of the same, and they had a guy who's playing now for, I think, maybe the Suns, and Damian Lee, who, I think at the time, Hunger Games was big, and every single three he hit, he would hold up the symbol that they would hold up in Hunger Games, and I'll never forget that game either. So going into the Yum Center, no matter how good of a team this Louisville team is, their coach, I've already kind of seen some things on the coach, and have seen some games that they've played in this year. They're really well coached. They play hard. They got a guy that's been around college basketball for a while, kind of like RJ and Hepburn, and then they've got some size inside as well. So not an easy game, game where you have to come in with the right mindset. What better way to start off the new year than going into the Yum Center and getting a win, though. So excited to see that. I think it's crazy that 2024 is almost done. You had mentioned it. Um, I think for me, kind of the last thing that I'll say is, um, I hope everybody has an unbelievable and amazing, safe, responsible New Year's Eve tomorrow. And as far as New Year's resolutions, it's going to go back to what I'm saying for this team is just staying consistent. I kind of do the same thing every single year. Okay, you know what? I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. Um, and after a month or so, it's kind of easy to just kind of fall off the wagon. But just stay consistent, and at the same time, don't kill yourself over, if you miss a day or a week or whatever it might be. Just hop right back, on it and keep on going. So, want to wish everybody a happy New Year's, happy 2025. Since we won't talk until after the New Year's, and I hope everybody enjoys the family and friends and everything like that, celebrating going into the New Year's.